often follows a formula of academic theory combined with a healthy dose of practical considerations. Trained in agronomy and agroforestry, Professor Mendez now combines these topics with agroecology to investigate landscape conservation, livelihoods, food security, climate change mitigation, and household-level dynamics for smallholder farmers. In a way that is difficult for many academics first trained in the natural sciences, Professor Mendez incorporates reflection into his work. Ever self-aware of his position within the research and thoughtful of social parameters guiding processes within agroecosystems. In this way, the work of Professor Mendez represents an evolution in the field of agroecology. He is part of a second generation of agroecologists who learned to value interdisciplinarity from their mentors and further incorporated it into the fabric of their own research. Professor Mendez has long bridged the divide between academic and community-based approaches for effective change, a tactic that demands a new metric for measuring the capacity and success of university professors. It's certainly a pleasure to have 3 generations of agroecologists in the room, a relief to be the youngest of those, and an honor to count myself among them. Please join me in welcoming Professor Ernesto Mendez.
So welcome everybody, and I wanted to introduce Steve Leisman and Robbie Jaffe, who have come from California on an Eastern Coast tour. Steve Leisman was my graduate advisor at UC Santa Cruz in agroecology, and also a mentor, and he remains a mentor to date. I really want to thank him for doing this because this was supposed to be more of a vacation and a personal visit. And I roped them into coming here and talking to you guys because I thought it was a great opportunity for you to meet some of the pioneers in the field. So I'll just say a little bit about both of them. So Steve started his academic career as a plant ecologist. And he was drawn by the tropics and did his dissertation work in Costa Rica. And while doing that, discovered that a lot of the ecological processes he was studying in forests also had an effect on farmers to a certain degree, but not a lot on their livelihoods. So he was trying to look at plant mechanisms related to forest natural ecosystems, but then he was also thinking, well, you know, this is really good for the science of ecology, but it's not really helping the farmers that he was staying with and interacting with in the landscape during his studies. After that, he actually did a couple of different stints in Mexico, in a nursery, right? Plant nursery manager. And then ended up teaching in a new college of agriculture called the Colegio Superior de Agricultura Tropical, so the Tropical Agricultural College. It was at university. And this was around the 1970s. And I think one of the most interesting things about this panel is for all of us to share the different moments in agroecology that we've experienced. So word has it that Steve and his colleagues in Mexico developed this term agroecología in Spanish, although the term had been used beforehand in English, and they were doing it at the same time when there was a lot of pressure and support for green revolution technology in Mexico. So it was a really interesting historical moment where agroecology was developing in southern Mexico in this part, but at the same time there were a lot of projects with a lot of money trying to support the Mexican government to transform Mexican agriculture into a green revolution model. After some years there, Steve moved to University of California, Santa Cruz, and founded the first agroecology program in the United States at a university. He also held the first endowed chair in agroecology in the country, as far as I know. And ever since has been the mentor for hundreds of graduate students and undergraduate students. Yes, quite a few. And a lot of those are people like me who came from Latin America. He has been very supportive of Latin American students coming to the States and getting higher education. He just recently retired, so he's now an emeritus professor. And I'm just really happy that you'll get a chance to hear him and hear his agroecological perspective. Robbie Jaffe, I have also worked with too. I met Robbie when she was leading a program also out of the University of California, Santa Cruz, called Life Lab, which was a program that helped schools teach science and language through school gardens. And since this was California, in Monterey Bay, we had a lot of Latino immigrant populations, and a lot of these elementary level children were trying both to learn English on top of the regular academic curriculum. And what this program did is, by creating gardens and by trying to bring people that were bilingual, like me, and helping to coach teachers to use those gardens to do inquiry-based learning so that the students could learn both the science and the gardening. After doing that for quite some time, like that, which Life Lab still is going strong now. How long right now? Over 20 years of doing that. In fact, I have quite a connection to Life Lab because that's where I met my wife. Well, working at Life Lab, so it's been really important in a lot of ways.
I met her on Life Lab.
And they met at Life Lab. So lots of Life Lab connections. But after that, Robbie became sort of like the champion of what became the Community Agroecology Network, which is a network that includes agroecology. A lot of the people that went to school with Steve became part of this network and remain part of this network, and some new ones. But this NGO has a really challenging mission of trying to integrate agroecology and sustainable rural development, along with participatory research, action education, and trade innovation. So it's a very ambitious goal, and we've been really lucky to have Robbie lead CAN since 2001, pretty much as its executive director. So I'm going to let Steve start, but before that, I just want to thank the sponsors of the event, the UVM Gun Institute for Ecological Economics, the UVM Food Systems Research Spire, the Environmental Studies Program, and the Plant and Soil Sciences Department. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Steve.
Well, it's kind of interesting. First of all, gosh, to be here in Vermont, very different from California. 4 days ago, I was harvesting the last of our grapes for the year. A very interesting year. Temperatures close to 110 most of the summer. Droughts during the winter before. And when you're dry farming, depending on nature, pretty rainfall, it creates quite a challenge. And that's kind of something I won't talk about today, but I could talk on and on about the practice of agroecology, which is really an important piece of what we do. But I thought what I'd do today is just explore some of those roots that Ernesto was talking about. Where did the concept come from? At least for those of us that are working together in our networks today. And especially at a time when it seems like the concept, the term, the focus of agroecology has caught on. It's fascinating. We're seeing programs with the term agroecology and them pop up in a lot of different places, even at UC Davis. But how they use the term is the question. And as we've seen with other terms that are important to us, like sustainability, what's happened to that term when we think about where it came from? And what's our responsibility then to be clear about what it is and what it means to do agroecology? So I thought I'd just kind of go over some of the historical roots in the science, the ecology piece, and how the agro part got connected, and why it's important to have an ecological foundation in our thinking about food systems. And I'm not quite sure how much detail to go into in some of this stuff. I could go on and on. After teaching agroecology for a long time, it's sort of hard to cram it all into about 15 minutes, but we'll do our best. I think all of us are aware of why we need it. what's happening in food systems, what's forcing this transformation, this change process. Everything from the constant problem of access to energy, how much it costs, who controls it, the impacts of gathering it, effects on global climate change, all sorts of things wrapped up in what energy is. Down through and to, issues like the globalization of the food system. We might expand on that term and talk about the corporatization of the food system. What's it mean to talk about something called corporate commercial organic agriculture? And how does that relate to agroecology and sustainability of food systems? Big issues. And I think agroecology gives us a way to really take them apart, unpack them, to put them back together in a way that really means something to people throughout the food system. And you'll hear me say this several times. When I'm talking about the food system, I'm talking about from the seed in the soil all the way to the table and back again. The whole food system. Gosh, when we think about agriculture, how big the scale has become. I was once told this was one of the biggest cultivating tractors you can get being used in Iowa. But when we think about the impacts of using something like this from an ecological, an economic, and a social perspective, because number one, who can afford a tractor like that? What scale do you have to operate at in order to have one, independent of all the other aspects? That's why it's important to understand the whole food system and how it's so connected to large-scale, single-crop plantings, monocultures. And I think, especially here in Vermont, the multifunctionality of the landscapes within which agriculture functions, very different perspective. And there's so much to learn, I think, here about that kind of relationship that can be of very much value in other parts of agriculture and other parts of the world. And in California, water has become such an issue, and the politics behind the southern San Joaquin Valley, the Central Valley of California, and how large-scale farm systems are trying to create this image that it's all Congress's fault. It has nothing to do with nature. It has nothing to do with politics or money. Well, anyway, after this dry area was left out of production for 1 year because of cutbacks in water deliveries from the Central Valley Water Project, went right back into cotton next year. Irrigated cotton. The whole story behind that. And the things we keep hearing about, we have to deal with the fact that by 2050, 9 billion people to feed. And we have to do anything and everything to feed those people, no matter what. You see who's, oops, excuse me. Sorry, I can't use these buttons. That little thing right there, they have the answer. They're a sustainability organization. If you look at their website, their propaganda. Where's the agroecology? And do you have any of these yet in Vermont? The bioengineered, blue sheep ready to harvest the blue wool. You don't have to dye it. Well, I don't know if that exists or not. That's sort of kind of an idea of where we need to go or want to go, or the thoughts that we can get there in different ways. But this piece, I think, is kind of really important. These are data from the U.S. from 1910 all the way up to about 1997. I probably have a few more new numbers on this. It just shows, if you look at the part here, this is the cost of production. The part up here, the cost of marketing. This is the cost of the inputs. And this is what's left over of the percent of the dollar that a consumer pays for the food that ends up in the hands of the farmer. We're talking about 9% in a conventional system, using all of the conventional relationships in the market system. And I think over the last 15 years or so, we've probably been able to reduce the input side of it a bit, but it's all shifted over to the other side here rather than into the hands of the farmer. And that's got some important pieces about sustainability in it as well. Because when the profit margin is lower, usually the response is plant more. All right? I know we've seen this in coffee, we've seen it in corn, we've seen it in all sorts of crops. which then pushes people to that large-scale monoculture sort of model of farming. Well, agroecology, and as Ernesto mentioned, gosh, I know that some of you are in his course right now of agroecology and have had some of this, or certainly receive it. Others, maybe agroecology is new. Maybe it's something you don't know a lot about. Well, I thought it would be good to kind of go back into some about what it is. And you can think about it. I know I've used this definition for quite a while, using ecological principles and concepts to design and manage sustainable food systems. That's how I defined agroecology. At least that's the way I was defining it in the second edition of my agroecology. And maybe by the time I get done, I'll propose a different or a slightly modified definition that I'm working on for the third edition. Because the field keeps changing. And it's got the ecology in it. It's the foundation, it's the basis. It's our ecosystem thinking, systemic thinking, whole systems thinking, with all of the interrelationships, interactions, complexity, resistance, resiliency, all of the things that makes nature work. And it does a pretty good job on its own. And it was where I was trained originally. And have an understanding of, look out on the hillside and see what's happening and be able to unravel it and take it apart. And then we've got this idea of designing an agroecosystem. Designing it, putting the parts together in a way that functions using those principles. But apart from designing it then, once you have all those parts together, the question is, how do you manage them? What is sustainable management? What is an agroecological management? These are concepts that we've been working with for quite a while. And then the food systems idea. I know in our first edition of the book, it was sustainable agroecosystems. And it's a wonderful concept, agroecosystems, and I think a very useful one. And I still use it a lot. But I've expanded it to the idea of the food system in order to give a better impression that even though I personally think an agroecosystem and a food system are the same thing, it includes everything, like I said, from the seed and soil to the table. When some people look at the term agroecosystem, they only think ecosystem. They only think it's an ecological approach. So the food system approach has helped us expand that. And then, of course, this term, sustainability, what it means, and how in agroecology, one of our major focuses has been to really try and identify the best indicators of sustainability, or even what is a good indicator of sustainability, and how it's broken up into three major areas: the ecological indicators, the economic indicators, and the social indicators. All of them different, some easy to measure, some almost impossible to measure, to tell us not so much if the system we have is sustainable or not, but if a system is moving towards it or away from it. A very important way of thinking. And the ecosystem concept, think of, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I don't have a lot of time, because Ernesto, you're around or took off or he'll be back. Who's watching my time? I'm going to need someone to give me at least a 5-minute warning. All right? Just about 10 things. Okay. An agroecosystem, in a sense, is the same as an ecosystem, but with this change here, a lot of inputs from the human side, some of them renewable, some of them non-renewable. And when we think about the difference between those two, and the impacts that building an agroecosystem dependent upon non-renewability or renewability, how important that is in terms of making the whole system work. And then the funneling that goes on in the agroecosystem through crops and animals to the market and out of the system, never to return. From an ecological perspective, I call that a loss, a leak. And one of our big focuses in agroecosystem with an agroecological perspective is to figure out how we can reduce those losses, which in a way increases the efficiency of the system, increases from the nutrient cycling point of view, from an energy flow point of view, sustainability. So these are things that are very important. And so it's been a challenge, knowing that as we simplify agroecosystems from an ecological perspective, we increase the losses from that system, the leakages from that system, we increase the dependency on outside inputs, and we decrease the sustainability. One principle that I've always worked with, and maybe this is partially my ecological background, but it's also just the observations on nature. You know, that if I can design my agroecosystem to be as similar as possible to the natural ecosystems of that region, the better the chance of it being a sustainable system. In other words, nature's my model. I've always thought about that, wherever I've worked, from the tropics to the temperate regions, thinking about how similar or how different. And in California, for example, with our Mediterranean climate, where during the whole summer, from the 1st of May, maybe even the 1st of April, all the way through the 1st of November, not a drop of rain. But it's also when we do most of our cropping. Sort of do agriculture in an area, either irrigate, or you develop a rain-fed, dry farm system. And some crops you can do that, some you can't. But it's a real difference. But it's not a law, it's more a hypothesis to be tested. And to think about whenever you design an agroecosystem is how similar is it to the natural ecosystems of an area in which you're working. I also remember that when I first was working with the concept of the agroecosystem, and agroecology is our focus, I would say that, in reality, an agroecosystem is more complex than a natural ecosystem. And ecologists would say, no, agricultural systems are simplified systems. But when we started saying, well, wait a minute, you're forgetting that really complicating factor, humans. That's what makes them more complex in reality. So, this is the definition I worked with for quite a while. Ecological processes and sustainable agroecosystems. Just understanding how they work from an ecological point of view, but knowing they're working in a human context. And there's just so much when we first started working with agroecology to learn about how interactions occur, how nutrients were cycled, how energy flowed through that system, how complexity added stability. All sorts of interesting and important questions from an agricultural perspective. But a lot of that came for me personally, as Ernesto mentioned, from 10 years I spent in the tropics, the last 5 of them teaching at a low school of tropical agriculture in southern Mexico. And this was one of my major teachers. This agroecosystem and the farmers who had practiced this, passed it on from generations and generations for literally hundreds of years. The Mayan traditional farming system of corn, beans, and squash intercrop together. There is so much ecology, so much culture. In fact, we used to talk about the fact that it was an intercultural experience, the development of that Agroecology, where the cultural experience of the Mayan came together with the ecological experience of sort of Western thinking scientists. And out of it came this intercultural field we call agroecology. In fact, it's the focus of the International Agroecology course we're doing this January down in the Yucatan. The relationship between agroecology and interculturality as a force for change in food systems. I could talk about lots and lots of the work that's been done in the system. I won't do it now. Just imagine how many kinds of interactions are going on here just between 3 crops. Not to mention the non-crops that are in there from the plant perspective. Not to mention all of the arthropods that are there. Not to mention all the microorganisms in the soil below. On and on. And the pieces that we've unraveled about how those all work together to make that system work in a sustainable way. And how it begins kind of with this genetic basis and how it goes back into the history of coevolution between the people and their environment. And it can be as complex as tropical home gardens, kitchen gardens, forest gardens, lots of different names for them. 50, 60, 150 species in small areas. Plants and animals both all interacting. We took this foundation then at Santa Cruz, and through the period of about 20 years, developed a kind of a way of thinking about using agroecology for changing, for transforming food systems. And maybe that's where the new definition's headed. Transformative field, where at first we were looking kind of at level 1, where a lot of agronomy still is stuck, and trying to just make current conventional systems work better so they use less inputs and have less damage on the environment. Good thing, right? But it's stuck. The systems usually a monoculture system subject to all the problems that I mentioned earlier on. We started working in the early mid-80s at level 2 with farmers who on their own had decided to make the transition to certified organic with little information, if any, about how to do it and what kind of system they were moving towards. Partnerships between farmers and researchers helped us go through that process of taking out, substituting the conventional inputs and practices and putting in an alternative that in this case met the needs of certification for organic practices. But that only went to a certain point because really we were finding out that the design of the system wasn't changing. It was still a monoculture. And the crop we worked with most was strawberries. One of the most intensive input crops anywhere, maybe except for some greenhouse crops. So we began to realize we had to go to this third level of redesigning the system using agroecology so the system resisted the problems that were a problem in the first place, and bringing that concept in. But finally, again, reached this level 4, where it was obvious that it wasn't just at the farm level that this had to happen. It had to happen through the whole farm's food system. It had to be a change in values of the kind of food we wanted, how we wanted it grown, what kind of relationship we wanted to have between the people who eat the food and the people who grow the food, and what it meant to have a socially just food system, an equitable food system, in order to change the whole paradigm of thinking about what food systems are about. And we went through a whole process of studying this conversion process and seeing how they changed ecologically as they moved, but also thinking about how they were changing socially. What kind of relationships were missing? What did it mean to be a farm worker in a socially just, sustainable food system? From quality of life, from how much a living wage, from all sorts of different aspects. The conversion process, I mentioned, is just things we look for. What do we study? What kind of indicators do we use? And how do we get beyond the indicators from a research perspective and reach this last one here? Using indicators that are really focused on farmer use. They're the ones that can. And I think that I learned that long ago in southern Mexico, working with the farmers there, that they had all kinds of indicators to tell them if the system was working well or not, and which changes needed to be made. Strawberries are one of our first crops. Side-by-side comparison of a piece of ground that had conventional history of management, going into organic and conventional side-by-side, running up against the need for redesign, moving on beyond redesign into different relationships between the grower and his workers, where today this particular farm is a model. And maybe to get back to something like this, with a diversified crop system embedded in nature. And the crop we've worked with so much, and Robbie will talk a lot more about it with can, is coffee. And it could be a monoculture coffee system as seen in Brazil. Or it could be a diverse food system where coffee forms a part of it. And coffee is part of the livelihood, not the entire livelihood of the farmers that are managed in this particular system in southern Costa Rica. Or this coffee forest system, which has the same structure and function of a natural forest in the cloud forest zone of Veracruz, Mexico. And underneath is the coffee. Well, it's a whole different system. And we summed up sort of the history, the experiences of working with this change process, the conversion to sustainable agriculture, in a book that one of my former grad students and I edited here 2 years ago. And there's a whole lot of different things in there about that conversion process leading up and including how to get us to that level 4 process, which probably ought to be level 1. If we have to change our value base to begin with, just imagine how that would change the way we work with systems. So there it is, different definition, ecological foundation for food system transformation. Like that? And to sum up quickly, what we're seeing now, there's been some recent reviews of what agroecology is, and some of them have divided agroecology actually into sort of 3 areas: the science, the research piece, the practice, the doing it, like organic agriculture or ecological agriculture. But the third piece, and this goes back to that resistance movement that agroecology began under, at least for me, in an area where the Green Revolution was capturing governments, capturing land, capturing farms, lots of stuff in the 1960s 70s in Mexico, and as almost a resistance to that movement, agroecology emerged. And it's really been identified as a social movement, and we see these social movements in lots of parts of the world. Farmer-to-farmer movements, campesino, lots of different ones that really reflect the fact that it's about changing the social side of food systems as well. And finally, if you don't have all three of those, it's not agroecology. Think about that, and that maybe will give us some good stuff to talk about. I always like to end with Buckminster Fuller's thing here. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Maybe that's what agroecology is about as well. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Robbie Jaffe. I also ventured with Steve from California. It's nice to see rain after months of dry stuff. But it's a pleasure to be here and join Ernesto and all of you. I'm going to be talking about the Community Agroecology Network, which is a nonprofit organization, an NGO that Steve, Ernesto, and myself and several other researchers founded 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago. And our vision is that we're working for a global economy where people, healthy food systems, and the environment come first. How many like that vision? How many are trying to work for that in their daily lives? Pretty interesting concept, huh? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, the background, and taking some of the concepts that Steve presented and show you how we're basically putting them into applied agroecology. So CAN's a nice acronym, but I think the three words behind it are of essence to what we're doing. And that number one is community, that we're about working at a community level, that working with all different parts of the community, from the individual farmer to the farmers' organizations, to the different, to the government, to the different systems within the community. Agroecology is the core of our work and what we're trying to do, from, as Steve mentioned, from everything from seed to table. And we're caring not only about the tables of the consumers, the people that are eating the food, we care very much about the table of the farmers who are growing the food. And network. Our network is so important because it's about relationships. It's relationships at a community level, and it's relationships at an intercultural, international level. So CAN's mission is, as Ernesto mentioned in the beginning, it's complicated because we're not okay with just working on rural livelihoods and farmers' livelihoods. That's super important. But it's not just okay to be working on that without connecting it to the environment. So bringing livelihoods and environment together are what CAN is always attempting to do. And we have three very integrated programs, which I'm going to tell you about, hopefully in the appropriate time. One is research, or action research. You'll see action a lot, because what CAN is about is really taking everything to the action level, to the doing level. So all of our work is based on participatory action research, and it's core to what we're doing. And we connect that with action education, which is opportunities, especially for young people, for university students, to get engaged in working internationally, and working on sustainable development, and working on in food systems. And then trade innovations, really, I'll talk about that in a minute as well, and that comes very much out of the farmers, especially the coffee farmers, saying to us, well, if we're going to be doing this, we really need some alternative markets. So us researchers and educators said, sure, we'll try to develop alternative markets. And we've learned a lot. So CAN was formed about 10 years ago with researchers who spent probably altogether over 100 years researching and working in Mesoamerica. Many of them are from there and actually live in the communities where they're conducting their research. And it very much came out of a time where actually Steve and I had a sabbatical year, and we went to visit Ernesto and others. Ernesto was working on his PhD research in Tacuba, El Salvador. And we were amazed, here's Steve and I, based in working in food systems, we're amazed to see the devastation happening in the coffee communities there. While we in the United States were enjoying our $3 lattes, so maybe they were $4 by then, we were totally unaware of the coffee crisis and that farmers were not getting enough to even harvest their coffee, and communities were falling apart. And so the researchers working in communities from Costa Rica through Mexico got together and we decided we needed to do something more than our research at a community level. We needed to somehow form a network that we could work together to try to educate at that point, with a major emphasis on educating coffee consumers about the issues going on in Central America and Mexico. So some of the foundations of CAN became really looking at how do you take traditional culture, traditional farming systems, and integrate it with ecology, with the science of ecology. And how do we take farmers, especially young farmers, and help them be leaders in their communities and foster sustainable community. So instead of the idea of once I become educated, once I grow up in a rural community, which is so common in Mexico and other locations, that once if I get a high school education, if I'm going to find work, I need to leave my community. It's really hard for me to stay in that community. So we're trying to redesign the system in collaboration with our partners in the different communities where we work, and sort of say, how do we create a sustainable community here? How do we create viable opportunities for the young people in these communities? CAN works with community-based partnerships. I can't underline enough how important that is to us. So in every community and region that we're working, we have a partner organization. It might be a farmers cooperative, it might be an NGO, it might be a university, but there's an organization on the ground that has direct connection with the farmers there and really collaborates and leads the type of projects that the community wants to see happen, that the farmers want to see happen. CAN and the researchers are not going in saying this is what we should be doing. We're saying how together can we move this forward? What do you want to see happen? CAN right now partners in 8 different regions, 4 of them in Mexico, 2 on the Yucatan Peninsula, the Chiapas region, the Veracruz region, El Salvador. You all might know who represents us as the researcher. And there, Tacuba, and I think several other people have been doing research in Tacuba as well. And then 2 areas of Nicaragua, the northern region of Las Segovias, and then the Matagalpa-San Ramon area, and southern Costa Rica, the Panama border, the Agroecology area. Of these regions, well, really all but one of them are active coffee growing regions, and are the 2 on the Yucatan Peninsula are, for those who know the Yucatan, it's obviously not a coffee growing region, but a very important part of the CAN network. So each region, we're a network, and we're sort of amoeba-like, which is really wonderful. So there'll be different regions of the network that are really active at different times. But within each region, we'll have a relationship working on the things they might want to be involved with. So some might really want to be involved in agroecotourism or in youth leadership development, food security. Others are involved in our alternative coffee market. Each region, though, will have a partner organization and a researcher who's the researcher liaison. I have 5 minutes left? Okay. So that's all really important to it. And together, we're working, as we talked about before, conserving landscapes and connecting that to sustainable livelihoods. So I want to spend a few minutes on one of the core projects we're working on right now, and this is in our action research initiatives, and we're working on food security projects. Because what's so amazing in these rural communities with a lot of small landholders is that what we've found, and part of this comes out of Ernesto's research and others, is that the farmers do not have enough food to eat year-round. I mean, think about that for a minute. They're farmers that their families for about 3 months of the year do not have enough food to put on their table. Something's really wrong when the system is operating that way. So can funding through Green Mountain Roasting Company, who has a phenomenal social responsibility program, and also through the Kellogg Foundation, has been working in partnership with some of our regions to really look at the issues behind this, what's going on, and what are the possibilities to bring about change related to that. And in doing that, we use a process that I think many of you are familiar with in terms of participatory action research. So the research is not for the research's sake, because the researchers certainly get that information from that, but it's very much engaging the community and looking at social change in that community. And what we have found in our approach is agroecology based. It's very much based around collaboration, often working within the cooperative movement. Core to our work, and I can't emphasize this enough, is that to really change food security and food sovereignty issues in the regions we're working with, and I think pretty much, I would probably say this, it would be interesting to test, but it would hold true worldwide, is that it really involves gender equity, giving women empowerment in terms of land use and opportunity, and also generation, really creating opportunities for young people to stay and thrive in their communities. And Steve referred to the intercultural approach, which is core to our work. And we're working on improving short-term food security, but with the idea of really redesigning the system in collaboration with these communities to bring about long-term food sovereignty. Those are the 4 key regions right now where we're working with food security. And I just want to say one of the things we're finding that's, I think, really interesting is that the approach, the goal is the same in each region we're working, but the approach is really different. And we designed the approach in collaboration so it can really meet the needs of those communities. So in northern Nicaragua, the approach was really creating a system where people could have basic grains year-round. And a lot of that had to do with appropriate storage and appropriate access to food. Whereas in other regions that we're working on, it became clear that it had to do more with diversity of food and how can they grow diverse food year-round and supply that, and how could we create alternative market chains such as farmers markets. So many of the things that we've all come to take for granted, how can we do that as income generation for people within the community? So just 5 principles that are common, I think, to food sovereignty, and what we're really working to is that the food providers are really valued. Youth growing up in these marginalized communities, these rural communities, have no idea of the value of their ecosystem, of the value of the work their families are doing, to both in terms of conserving ecosystems and the type of work, many of us here really want to learn about farming and food systems. Those youth have so much knowledge about it, and they don't realize that they have that knowledge to share. Localizing food systems and having that control be local, building knowledge and skills, and working with nature. And together, when you think of that, when I was looking at that slide earlier, I said, well, when I think of Vermont, I think you probably could check mark by all 5 of those. And Vermont has done a phenomenal job on a policy level and on a local level of really working towards food sovereignty. And how do we take that? How do we work with other parts of the world in making that happen? So CAN and our work in food sovereignty have found two really core things. And right now what we're doing is we're actually in the process of forming an international youth network that involves young leaders in the communities where we're working on food security projects, as well as university students in the U.S. And we're working about building leadership skills and food security and sovereignty knowledge and ways to come about it. And really quickly, because I know I don't have any more time, that connects very strongly to two CAN's two other programs. One is Action Education, which works with young people. It's especially worked with university students in the U.S., setting up opportunities to do field studies, participate in field courses, and do intercultural exchanges in our partner communities in Mexico and Central America. And that's been really core. And now we're building an international youth network. We're sort of equalizing the playing field and bringing and incorporating youth from the partner communities in a way that they're engaging and learning and sharing their knowledge with U.S. students. We've had 2 international youth exchanges. The first one took place in Santa Cruz, California 2 years ago. This past June we had one in Nicaragua with 30 young people representing 6 different regions. And it's just a really phenomenal experience that we're growing and building on and going to develop a whole series of programs related to the youth network. What happens though on our campuses, we're working right now with 3 campuses in California, Vermont. I know Ernesto has some things going on here, where students get together and figure out different ways that they can involve and create action related to food system sovereignty and international issues. And at UC Santa Cruz, where CAN is based, we have a student organization that has weekly meetings. They take on different programs. They find ways to educate people on campus and in the community to really make a difference. And then I mentioned the exchanges. We also, CAN offers international field studies. Where students for a semester or a quarter can go live with a farm family in one of our partner communities, and usually it's set up where you can get credit. Some students develop their senior theses around it and have just really phenomenal, literally life-changing experiences. And if anyone's interested in knowing more about that, you can talk to me afterwards. I'd be happy to share that with you. So what CAN's trying to do in our learning cycle is we really strive to engage students on their campus, get involved, learn more about it, and then experience it. Go live in a community, live with a farm family, have an experience that really shows you, it gives you an opportunity to have different teachers and mentors in your life through the farm families themselves. And then a really important part is to be part of that whole cycle, to bring that learning home and bring it back to campus for you to be able to share with others. Then our third program, which I'll just introduce and I won't talk much about it, is, so I mentioned that when we started this program, the farmers said to us, when we said, okay, we're going to form this NGO, what do you want us to do? And they say, find an alternative market for our coffee. And I'm sure Ernesto remembers it well. We all went, okay, we'll figure that out. And we learned that it's really complicated, but we have set up some really phenomenal direct trade models. We're right now from 2 of our partner regions, San Ramon, Nicaragua, and Veracruz, Mexico. We're bringing coffee in directly from the cooperatives, and so a higher return, we can trace back the higher return to the farmers. We've set up a sustainability fund in each of the regions, and every year the farmers decide where the sustainability fund money is going to go. For example, in Nicaragua, last year they put in a new milling system so that they stopped polluting the water through the milling process with the new system. So really important changes like that. But again, we're research-based, so the information that we monitor the changes, and we publish the changes not only on our website, but also we created something that's similar to a nutrition label, but it's a sustainability label on the back of each of our packages. I'll pass this around so you can get a sense of it. And that coffee, if you're interested, can be ordered from CAN direct online. So that's a third leg of our program. So CAN is a network for social change. We base it around intercultural education and agroecology, and we're a network that's really modeling the PAR process. We're working on everything from alternative markets to youth leaders. We really are trying to bring together that link on a global level, or in a way creating a global farmers market where you have the opportunity to interact directly with farmers that you normally would not have the opportunity to have an exchange with, and you become literally part of their lives, and they become part of yours as well. And ultimately, what we're really working for is community-based food security. So this gives you an idea of applied agroecology through CAN. Thank you.
Hello everybody, so I'm Ernesto Mendez, for those of you that came a little later. And you guys could look at my hair and see how much gray there is. The idea of this panel was that we were going to have 3 generations of agroecologists, right? And so that's why I'm calling my talk Reflections from the Generation of the Middle. After I talk, my graduate students and members of my group are going to facilitate the discussion, and what I asked them to do is, bring up some of the issues that you're facing that are related to agroecology now. Because in his moment, Steve had some issues that he was facing the Green Revolution, right? That's what was happening, and agroecology was a response. When I came to it, it was a little bit different, and now the new generation, these 9 students and researchers that are working in the Agroecology and Rural Livelihoods group, they're facing different issues. So the idea is to bring all these together for an intergenerational discussion. Steve talked a little bit about this, how agroecology first started as the application of ecology to the design and management of sustainable agroecosystems, but then evolved into the integrative study of the ecology of the entire food system. So when I was a grad student starting agroecology, the 2 things that I was really interested in is how to make the field more transdisciplinary. Or in that time, we were thinking more about interdisciplinary. But I like transdisciplinary because of this second bullet, and which is not only are we trying to integrate different academic disciplines to bring into our research, natural sciences, social sciences, maybe even humanities, which could be called interdisciplinary, but we're also interested in integrating different forms of knowledge that can come from farmers or people that are not in the academy, right? And other characteristics of transdisciplinarity is that maybe you're problem-based, that you're doing research, but that research has a very specific problem that wants to be resolved. So for me, that was one of the big challenges when I was a grad student is Steve and the pioneers of agroecology were very cognizant that interdisciplinarity was needed, but it was kind of like they were pushing us to go out and do it in our empirical research, more PhDs in our studies. The other one that I was really interested in was participation. How could we make research more participatory? And this is nothing new in agriculture. There's been a lot of writing, a lot of models, farmer first, farmer participatory research that are similar, have similarities and differences to participatory action research. But when I came to agroecology, I found, again, like a lot of people very aware that it was needed, but a need to actually move it forward and actually test it and try it. And both Robbie and Steve mentioned what it is, but the idea is that you get into this cycle of research, reflection, and action with your partners, which can be both research and non-research partners, but that maybe at the end you're going to end up doing something that can solve the problem, support social change, And if it works really well, maybe you can share it with somebody else. So these were my two really challenges that I was facing as an agroecologist. And that's what I've tried to do with my work ever since, is how to bring these two themes, transdisciplinarity and FAR, into agroecological work. This is coming from a very recent publication that will be out next year. And with my colleagues Chris Baker and Rose Cohen, both of us went to graduate school together. We came up with some principles that participatory action research and agroecology share. And I don't want to go through them one by one, but one of the interesting things about agroecology is that there's an inherent desire for participation and an inherent desire for transdisciplinarity. The fact that agroecologists from the onset valued and thought that farmer knowledge was interesting is very different than other types of scientific endeavor. It doesn't mean that's all that is valued, but it means that we want to integrate that with modern science, with basic science maybe. But, we want to bring all those together to generate better knowledge, but also maybe to resolve some problems. When you start talking about food systems, it's really hard not to get political. And that doesn't mean that I'm going to say that I'm Republican or Democrat or take on a political bandwagon, but that you're going to be aware that there are structural issues that are responsible for the way the food system functions. And that you can do a lot of research in the field, but that research may not have a big effect on the overall food system because the structural issues are pretty big. So maybe you can just be aware and say, well, my research with the farmers in the field is going to work for these farmers, but it's not going to really affect a bigger food system, right? Or you could say, how can we try to, bottom up, press that food system in order to create more change? A lot of us in agroecology have tried to engage in action-related ventures. Here's Steve and Robbie own and manage a vineyard in Santa Barbara, California. And I think this is really interesting, and a lot of agroecologists end up doing this, but they end up farming too. And it's good to have that experience of being a farmer to talk about farming and doing research about farming. I haven't done it yet, I don't know. I like coffee farming a lot, and I can't do it in Vermont, so we'll have to see what happens. So that's one way that I think a lot of people just getting really into the farming itself to try to better understand it, but also, being part of rural people and their social movements, their social organizations, by educating and publishing, practicing agroecology, and trying to influence policy. In my particular case, this influencing of policy is what I'm trying to do is to translate a lot of my more scientific work into policy briefs and then communicating it in a form that's more accessible to policymakers and others in the agricultural industry. For example, in my work in coffee that deals with food security in coffee communities, similar to what Robbie presented, we're just finishing up with Martha Caswell, a researcher in the lab, who's also videographer today, in the back. We're finishing up a policy brief on food security in coffee communities with the objective of having others, other than scientists that are reading the journals, right, learn about these issues. So translating it into a friendlier language. Not only policymakers, but in the case of coffee, the coffee industry. So the coffee industry has a lot of stakes, right? They're funding projects, and they're preoccupied about the situation farmers are facing, so we want them to understand. So that's one way of taking action-oriented approaches. So Steve mentioned how agroecology is changing, and I think it's important to just touch on that briefly. So in the last 5 or 6 years, a field that a lot of people didn't talk about that much before has really started popping up in different spaces. In policy spaces, there's this international assessment of agricultural technology and knowledge, which is a group which was commissioned by the World Bank and the UN to look at the state of agriculture, and agroecology comes up as an approach that could lead us into developing better food systems. We also have the UN Special Rapporteur for Food, Oliver de Schutter, who's been talking a lot about agroecology and how it is an approach that could be useful if we want to increase food security around the world and improve the food system. And in the past, we really didn't see the field being used in this way. So there's a lot more interest in agroecology lately. Steve mentioned the reviews, so there's a lot of scientists that are now embracing agroecology. And it's controversial because we believe, I think Steve and I share this, that some of those people are trying to redefine it in a different way. And there's been at least 3 or 4 major lit reviews in peer-reviewed journals on agroecology from people that in the past were not associated with the field. So we decided to also do a review that's coming out next year. I'll mention that later. But it's also starting to appear more as part of farmer movements and farmer organizations and international rural development organizations like Heifer, who really embraced agroecology at least 5 or so years ago, and started incorporating it into a lot of this program. So it's interesting to see this developments and this evolution. And one of the things that we've been working on is trying to look at agroecology since its origins and look more at it as an evolution. And one of the things that we can see that is important about the field and why it is attractive to a lot of people right now is that it's very integrative. So it brings together social sciences, ecology very strongly, the science of agronomy, but also that transdisciplinary characteristic of local knowledge and farmer knowledge, right? So all of these things brought together. What's going on right now, it seems, is that there's 2 dominant perspectives. One that is more concerned with transforming agri-food systems, hence it's a lot more complicated and has to embrace more complexity because the food system is beyond the farm system or the field. And the other one, which is more interdisciplinary and more concerned with transforming agricultural production. So what we would see here is more agronomic-like experiments that are whose objective is to make agriculture more environmentally friendly, improve the ecological soundness of agriculture, but might not actually go beyond that into food system issues that concern consumers, processing, transportation. So I wanted to end really quickly by just showing you how I try to apply those principles of transdisciplinary and participatory action research into my agroecological work. This is a project that has recently started, and we are actually calling it in the lab the Vermont Farm Resilience in a Changing Climate Initiative, because there's different projects involved in it. It was recently funded by the Food Systems Fire here at UVM, and we also have other funders that I think I acknowledge somewhere. But what are the objectives here? And you can see that a lot of the objectives really fit with what I've been talking related to agroecology. One is identifying existing farming practices, so going to that farmer knowledge. So what are farmers already doing right now that could contribute to climate change mitigation and or adaptation here in Vermont? Assessing farmers' interest in pursuing what we're calling climate change best management practices, which the idea is to look at what's there and then start having conversations with farmers about potentially how to improve them, but also how to share them with other farmers. And the project has a research component, but also a very strong outreach and extension component, focusing on sharing all the knowledge that is coming out of here. So we could potentially improve those existing practices through agroecology. And the other piece of this project is that it has a big focus on policy. So how could policy at the state level and even at the national level support some of these best management practices? And along with that is providing better decision support systems for policymakers and others. It is incredibly collaborative. I know because I lead it and there's a lot of people involved. It's really hard to get meetings going. So we have a team coming out of the Agroecology and Rural Livelihoods group. Kate Westek, who's not here, but Martha Castro is back there. Rachel Chapman, who became a PhD student in the project, but also earlier on was part of our collaboration with the Center for Sustainable Agriculture, who was providing some of her time as part of a collaboration. These are all the co-principal investigators from across UVM. We've been really lucky to recruit and have access to a wide variety of students, both graduates and undergraduates. There's a lot of people, a lot of stuff going on. And this pretty much just started in July. Some of the funding that came into this, the Gun Institute, the Food Systems Research Spire. Wait, this is not the right slide. Oh, I guess some of them. The Gun Institute supported earlier funding at the beginning of the year. The Food Systems Research Spire is provided considerable support for 3 years. And then these three actually supported a previous workshop. But we also have funding from the Vermont Community Foundation more recently, and also a hatch grant. So a lot of resources, a lot of people, very collaborative. We're trying to follow those principles, applying this participatory action research, bringing as many of all the relevant stakeholders to the table, which, here we have identified as students, farmers, researchers, extensionists, policymakers, ag service providers, and funders. Huh? Oh, here we go. These are the funders. We have 2 pending, and then Vermont Community Foundation we got. And I think that's all I'm going to say. And I'm going to pass it on to the 3rd generation of grad students who I just heard you guys won the poster. So, how many of you? Can you guys stand up? The guys that participated in the poster. So Marcela Pino, a master's student in my group. Meryl Olson, a PhD student in my group. Katie Goodall, PhD student in my group. And Sebastian Castro, all developed a poster for the student poster competition and one in the... And Caitlin Morris también also. Also a PhD student in my group. And you guys won in what category?
Food sciences and environment.
Yeah, so congratulations, you guys. And as a prize, we're going to have you facilitate the rest of the panel.
I invite the panelists to the table, I'm going to ask Sebas if you can pick up your questions. So the way it's going to work is that we have some prompts for the panelists, but also we're going to incorporate your questions if you have them in cards, or just raise your hand. And when we ask the question, we're going to ask it to the 3 of you, what you want to answer. We have a lot of questions, so we'll see how much we can get in. All right, here we go. So many agree that agroecology emerged as a response to increased industrialization of the food system. How would you say historical context guided, or continues to guide, the evolution of agroecology? How do you find yourself interacting with historical context as a researcher within an evolving field?
Well, that's just to think about. Just listening to Ernesto right now talk about the difference between transdisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity. I've always sort of thought this was kind of an academic thing. Why bother with this? Let's just do it. But now I can see how it really lets us bring in the So to me, it's the way we start bringing in that level 4 type of transformation in food systems by not just bringing together different forms of knowledge, but then beginning to think about different belief systems, different values that then create change. So for me, that's the piece that I've been trying to keep up with. You know, I know for myself, I wasn't trained as an agroecologist. I was trained as an academic ecologist, and I call myself an agroecologist, like self-anointed kind of thing. He was trained in agroecology, and now he's training agroecologists, and that's another way to sort of keep up with the changes in the field, is to create those opportunities, put them into action with a knowledge of how complex food systems are, the way we have a particular approach, a particular way of bringing together knowledge systems for change.
Anybody else?
I guess for me, and you know, we just finished a long exercise of evaluating where the field of agroecology is going and trying to look at the different perspectives that are coming up in a constructive way, in an open way. And what seems to be really important is to recognize that fields evolve, but to value all the challenges and the pain and the work that went into that evolution. Because you know what I'm seeing in some of this recent reviews is almost like a disqualification of a lot of the work that happened before, right? Which doesn't mean that you can't evolve and change, but just to also say, okay, I'm here because somebody had to self-anoint himself, right? And that this historical evolution is really important. There's a lot of learning that goes on. And now I can see, you know, I remember Steve telling stories about at some point feeling that the agronomists didn't like him, you know, he's an ecologist and he's not an agronomist, but he's talking about agriculture. And then the ecologists didn't like him because the ecologist only worked in natural systems. So, you know, it took some work and courage to just be able to stay in the middle. And probably now, you know, you look at around the world, you'll find agroecology graduate programs all over the place and growing, right? But that evolution took time, it took effort, and the other thing is that what I really like about the field is that it remains open to that change. It doesn't consider itself a perfect discipline, you know, but you know, we evolved to address the issues, to address the problems, to incorporate the new science that comes up.
So following that, I think on the more personal researchers, what do you think are the most important research questions facing agroecologists today? How have the most important questions changed since you started your career?
Well, maybe I'll just refer back to those levels, and I can think back about how I sort of moved personally through those levels as we gained an understanding of how an agri-ecosystem functions and how changing its design alters its function, but how that's embedded in a cultural context. And you know, that I just saw myself, and Robbie's trained as a social scientist, always used to kind of give me a hard time about that part. And now acknowledges that that part's been incorporated. And you're talking about the biggest challenges. That's part of that question, right? That we face, or
Sure. Good questions. You know that.
yeah, what are the big questions? And for me, it's really getting down to how do we turn this knowledge into action for change? That it's not just knowledge, that it's action. And that action then moves to real value changes, you know, based on our understanding of what a food system is, how there's a
say right now, to me, I very much come to it from the action end of it, from the applied end of it. But I see the need to integrate research with that. And the issues that we're, I think, attempting to deal with through agroecology and through applying agroecology have been issues for a long, long time. Hunger, environmental conservation, they've been around for a long time. So the research, in a way, going on what Steve's saying, has to be around that applied factor. It's sort of, okay, as we attempt to apply agroecology in the field, what kind of change is really happening? Are we having a paradigm shift? If we move away from purely a market, I'm not saying the market's really important, but if we move away from just purely a market approach to things, do we change the food distribution, food access capacity for people all around the world? So I think those applied type of questions, I think, are we're really ready to look at in terms of agroecology.
This is about CAN. So could you explain the new alternative markets developed by CAN? Do you think marketing is a large part of the movement of agroecology? And why do you think policymakers haven't implemented agroecological principles in agriculture policy? Or have they?
I'll try to take the first one. I don't know that I did tackle the last one. So what CAN has attempted to do market-wise, is look at how do we break down, how do we move away from a supply chain to a supply network. So instead of one end of the chain not knowing what the other end of the chain is doing, or what their issues are, or what their needs are, how do you make that into a circle and connect it? So the parts of the chain can know what's going on from one end to the other. And once you create that understanding, we think things really start to change. Then people understand on the coffee end, when we have this experience, that, oh, this is why I'm paying a little more for the coffee. So it's really getting to the farmer. I can see the research behind it. I can understand what's going on. So the farmer can say, oh, I'm really going to care about having a diverse coffee farm with shade trees and soil conservation and protecting the waterways that are going through my farm, because there's a lot of value there, and I'm learning about that partially from the people that are buying my coffee, because they're actually coming and visiting my farm, and they care about that. They want to see that. So I think that's a big thing of what we're doing with the coffee, and what we're doing right now specifically on the coffee is what we call direct trade. So we're trying to create as direct a link as possible between the farmers and coffee drinkers. And I'll just say we're now taking that and we're applying those ideas in our food security projects in the regions where we're working on food security and food sovereignty with our collaborators. And what they're coming up with, which just so blew me away. I've been really fortunate. I've spent most of my career working on school gardens and working with university students, and it's been amazing. And now I'm working in rural, really marginalized rural areas, and they're coming up with some of the same answers we're coming up with in Santa Cruz for local food systems. Some of the same answers you're coming up with in Burlington. They want to start school gardens so they can start getting kids at a young age to be eating more fruits and vegetables. They want to create local markets so people have access to food. And they want to create things like CSAs. And this is coming from the people we were meeting with, and I'm like, are you kidding? So I think applying a lot of what we've learned in our own systems to different regions can really work.
And what's really exciting is the young people, the communities that are moving all that forward, they're turning it into opportunities for themselves. They're the entrepreneurs for making this happen, creating alternative livelihoods for themselves to keep them in the communities. It's really some of the same kind of stuff we're seeing going on here. The policy side, how would we reach, where is that happening? And it comes to mind that about 3 weeks ago in Brazil, at the constitutional level, they instituted instigated a whole sort of family farm and agroecology, I guess
It's a law.
it's a law within the Constitution of the country of Brazil that recognizes and promotes that kind of agriculture and that kind of approach to it. Although, of course, on the other side, there's this whole other side of agriculture still going on as well. The big GMO, soybean, corporate industrial model. But the two are in existence. And just like what Mr. Fuller said, let's get that other one going. Can't stop that one. But we can develop the other one, and with time, it'll become a model of the shift that needs to happen in food systems because it integrates so much more of what the food system should be. And it can happen at local levels. That's I think here, this is where we see that happen. Where local municipalities, cities, counties, change something about land use, allow for mobile poultry processing, or allow for more direct marketing, or allow for and support different kinds of training opportunities for young people and access to land and development of food hubs in a community that brings together the production of multiple small farmers, aggregates it, and makes it available to the network of food users that go beyond that. All stuff that can be supported at the local level of local policy has to be, needs to be, and then it can move up from there. It's much more bottom up than a top down.
Can I ask, just to make things a little more diverse? So you guys asked us a question about, what are the issues and challenges that we have faced as agroecologists, and I wanted to bring it back to the Agroecology and Rural Livelihoods group, Katie and Sebastian and Meryl and Marcela, and what are some of the issues you're facing as people getting graduate degrees in agroecology right now? What are the issues, the themes, the burning questions that are keeping you awake at night?
So again, my name is Sebastian Castro, and I'm a student at Ernesto's lab. And my research takes place a lot with farmers, a lot of coffee farmers in Costa Rica. And what I'm being challenged is moving or trying to understand how farmers they can sustain this sort of learning processes. When they're engaged in research and you're sharing information and they're building up on that information to either change practices, but then how can they organize or how can they create organizations that sustain this research, even like coming from their own organization with their own, resources and expertise, how can they continue doing that and improving that sustainability of their farming system? So I'm finding that agroecology helps make that bridge, but still I struggle with, as a researcher, managing my time to invest time with the community and building up these processes at the same time as keeping up with my academic requirements. So I think that is one of the challenges I see as a researcher. I don't know if any of you have anything to add. Any one of you?
I guess I would add, my name is Katie Goodall, I'm also in the lab. I would add that my research looks at landscape level bird conservation across smallholder coffee communities. So one of the things that challenges me is why should farmers care about wildlife conservation? Which always comes back to me, well, why do I care? And a part of my research involves doing interviews with these farmers, and their main concerns are not the birds for obvious reasons. So that is constantly a reminder to me to sort of, it's a challenge to me, I suppose, to sort of balance the inherent importance of wildlife in the landscape with the needs of the people who are living there, which is at the heart of agroecology, but I think also is sort of a balance that becomes a battle as well, where those priorities land at the end of the day.
So my name is Lily Calderon. I'm not in the National Lab, but I am doing agroecology research in Vermont, and I work in extension. And I'm seeing that the farmers and brewers I'm working with, the farmers are really interested, and these brewers are very interested in like agroecology research, but I can't produce a result for them as quickly as I want. And I hope that they will stay interested as long as it's going to take me to produce, my research project. And we have like kind of side projects that we have to keep them interested, but I don't want to give them a false result, or, what I mean?
Yeah.
So my research is in Nicaragua, and I work mostly with subsistence farmers. And I identify with Katie's question is why do they care? And one of the things that is hard is that a lot of these very small farmers do want to grow and sell their crop in the market, and they want to, do monoculture and become for very good reasons. And then here again we are saying, well, agrobiodiversity is very important, and managing all this is very important. But I feel that so for me is what's the balance or the harmony between the values that we believe in terms of agroecologists and the real needs of farmers. So that's.
It's interesting, I just jumped in real quick. So many of the farmers we work with, and I know as a farmer have been inundated by this as well, but this whole paradigm, the only thing that really matters is production. And here's what you got to do to produce. And the whole system that's been developed for decades telling us that. That's the story. That's what's valuable. That's what works. Now we're saying with agroecology, there are other values, other things that matter, that are important to the whole system, not just the farm, the landscape, beyond that. And so we're really, again, trying to develop a different knowledge system, a different understanding, a different set of values, and create ways for them to be acknowledged, to be integrated into a knowledge system, but also be valued in a personal belief system, but also valued economically. And that's where the alternative market stuff that Robbie was talking about becomes so important, as those are parts of the product and part of the choice that the consumer makes, the eater makes in the moment of purchasing that. And in between, relationships, in our case, for example, a small roaster in Santa Cruz who's very supportive, who's connected, who's helped us set up the link between the farmer and the consumer. Because we're not roasters. And so that kind of needs to be included as well. So there's a lot about relationships here that are integrated into what you're doing as well.
Who was that question?
Well, it's sort of a question and a comment, I guess. I'm still struggling as to where the question is in it, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to share and then leave because I have another appointment. But my name is Ginger Nickerson, and I came out of the John Vandermeer Perfecto Lab. So I grew up reading your writings, and it's a treat to meet you in person. And I really appreciated when you said that agroecology is both a science, a practice, and a social movement. And that it's all three of those components, because that was very much the way that when I was taught agroecology, it was infused with all of those. I did my master's work in participatory action research on the Atlantic coast of Nicaragua, and then I went on and did my doctoral work here in Vermont on growers' resistance to GMOs in vegetable crops. And so I wanted to thank you for that piece of the history of agroecology and some of the early generations of agroecologists. And then I also wanted to thank Ernesto. I liked and found the diagram that you had at the end of this schism between or tension between, we can come through the framework of agroecology and take the science and apply it just to transforming production systems, or we can look at it as, taking a bigger step back and looking at the whole food system. And when you were looking at the square on my left-hand side, transforming the food system, that one distinguishing characteristics was that it's a bottom-up approach, it's political, and it honors a diversity of ways of knowing, not exclusively looking at scientific things. And to me, that really speaks to this issue of values that Steve was just talking about. And so I've been sitting here, kind of like trying to absorb all of this and come up with a question for you that has to do with that tension between, are we going to go, as agroecologists, are we just going to focus on transforming models of production, or are we going to look at trying to create food systems that are more values-based and are more open? And, I came of age professionally dealing with GMOs, and so for me, it comes down to policy. And I guess my boss is sitting in the room, so I'm speaking personally, not professionally. That a lot of it has, like, my challenge is campaign finance reform. Who's calling the shots? Yeah, that's my challenge. But I don't go there a lot in work.
But that's why, one of the things, somewhere in there I said, the political engagement, right?
Yeah.
Is that at some point, you're going to have to say, this issue is very structural, and it's not about what's happening. I'm not going to be able to resolve some issues by doing an agronomic trial of GMOs versus, organic seed production. And it doesn't mean that, I can't give you the answer, but even just an awareness and some of the tension that you're talking about exists sometimes because I feel that people doing more of the agroecology at the production level, which is very valuable, by the way.
Yeah.
Definitely not disqualifying it. Sometimes are saying we're going to resolve bigger issues through this work, and I think that's just kidding ourselves, right? If you want to resolve that issue, you're going to have to do a partnership or whatever, but it's not going to happen by doing field trials with farm record.
But I think for me, we've seen this happen in lots of different areas. And to me, organic's a great example of it. So what happens when an idea is captured, and you want, like with organic, there's, the pro is it's great to see it go to scale. And it's great to see large-scale farms using organic practices. But it is completely, shut out this idea of a small-scale organic farmer in lots of situations. And so what's the balance on there? And I think that's a lot of the same tension happening with agroecology as it catches on, especially in the academic areas of people who, okay, if this is going to be an academic science, then it needs to fit the regimen of what a science is. And that doesn't mean, and maybe that'll exist, but how do we keep the other part going and thriving as well?
Well, we have an interesting little political issue going on in California right now with Prop 37. The right to know, labeled GMOs or not, and the whole political process is phenomenal. trying to defeat it by all the usual suspects, including some large organic operations, or operations who have large organic component in their businesses. You know, it's why it's so important that our understanding beyond just production is important. You know, that it's all about relationships, interactions between different parts of the system, the environment, you know, community development. All this has to go in there, not just who's producing the largest amount. I mean, extensions faced this for a long time, as they have always been sort of the transfer of the research to the farmer. And we finally got beyond that, I think, where it's been more interactive between the extension people and the farmers. And now we're at the point, well, still, you know, does the extension person come with an agroecological perspective or not? And shares that perspective with the farmers. Gosh, it's a pretty important time.
Their facility.
Their facility.
You guys know me as the author of History of Coffee called Common Grounds. Covers a lot of stuff. But I don't know, I'm revising this humongous thing called For God Country Coca-Cola. Why I had it with me because I'm sort of underground into this. And one of the major issues involved is the history of Coca-Cola, very different product. But one of the huge issues that they've been criticized for rightly is that they're contributing to the obesity epidemic. The world's highest per capita of Coca-Cola by far is in Mexico. Mexico also has the world's highest obesity rate, I believe. And I'm just wondering if this is an issue that you deal with in agroecology. It seems to me that one of the things we must be looking at is not only should people diversify, not only should they be organic, but that they should be adopting a different method of eating and nutrition. But on the other hand, if you come in and preach at them, that's more top-down stuff, and it might be like saying save your birds. So I'm just throwing that, I don't know, we've never talked about that.
So I want to go back to some of the food security projects that we're working on are way, I think, addressing that. One of the things that was fascinating that we did when we started the projects, we first did a diagnostic of what was happening in multiple communities across the board. And what we saw was these are, again, rural communities, basically, you know, subsistence farmers or coffee producing farmers. And in the communities, we would see a bimodal curve where people were either undernourished or obese, and very little in the middle of normalcy. And we were pretty fascinated by that.
Sometimes aren't they both obese and undernourished?
Well, you could make that connection, but people were either not getting enough to eat,
Not
Or-
enough calories.
not enough calories, or when they had the money from the coffee, very often what they would do is they would go to the market and buy processed foods. And it totally moved in. Processed foods becomes a goal because they have access to TV. That's what they see, that's what's pushed on them. So we're really seeing it in that way, and we're also seeing in terms of the strategies. We're working in 4 different regions. 2 of them are in Mexico and 2 in Nicaragua. And I would say, especially the 2 regions in Mexico, the strategy that they adapted was diversifying food choices. So how do we engage people in gardening and eating vegetables and valuing greens, which are generally not valued and not eaten. So that is
So part of
something
the work's
that's
taking place in the kitchen.
Mhm.
In the kitchen where innovative cooks figure out how to take something that they don't normally eat and work it into their diet. One of the things that I found to be most fascinating was in Veracruz with the Veracruz lettuce, leaf lettuce. They didn't know how to eat it. They'd never eaten it.
They grew lots of it in
They
the
grew
garden.
lots of it really well. One stuff. And mole de espinaca, spinach mole, all kinds of good stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, so you just get creative, you show, you have to, that's where the active
There's
participation
also-
piece comes in.
That's really important.
In one of the Nicaragua projects, another strategy has been that they're doing these community-based, we call them calas, centro de acopio, centers that are community centers to bring together the maize production. So they buy it when it's cheap, and then when they sell it at a reasonable price, rather than the intermediaries come in, they buy it cheap, they sell it really high later. But the project and the co-op provide the financing for these calas, but they have rules. And one of the rules is that you can't sell junk food. And this rule was something that was voted on with close calls at that, because people are used to it. But there's definitely an awareness that, you know, junk food is really, and what I heard some people saying that was interesting was that it is a waste of money, because, yeah, sure, it tastes good, but it doesn't add anything to your nutrition. So, you know, you bring in that economic component of, you want to buy food that really has value, right, for your body. So that's another way where a lot of these highly processed foods are, you know, people are trying to get them out of the diet.
Just real quick, connected, be sure and follow the great controversy that the Stanford study that was published in the Journal of Internal Medicine a few weeks back, trying to say that there are no nutritional differences between organic and conventional. If you haven't seen it, you got to look at it, and the responses that have been coming out. Just yesterday, Mark Bittman came out with a column in the Times. Chuck Benbrook came out with a published study. Several things have begun to emerge so that we go beyond just the organic itself and all of the other things that are involved in creating healthy food, healthy, nutritional, ecological, all the pieces, the whole food systems approach to what's good food. And this real focused, single discipline approach demonstrates the importance and the value of this broader agroecological whole systems approach to what food is all about.
I guess to follow up on this different focus within the food system, and here I have to say I've been TAing a class with Ernesto, the Advanced Agroecology class, and it's really interesting how the students, they've got this idea of food system, that's a concept that is being shared here in the university community, and a lot of them are wondering of that, of like consumer choices, how do they come into agroecology? And I particularly have never thought of that. And I guess this is also, this is a question from somebody, it's how has agroecology been applied to other parts of the food supply chain? Consider it, for example, they ask, how can agroecology help all these sectors sustainable? I guess not only production, but also the other parts of the food system, right? Here it's very important. Also, I've been seeing a lot of interest in I guess, food handling, how much food is wasted, right?
That's a really important question. I think, as Robbie described in CAN, a big part of it is just creating a knowledge about what all the different parts of the food system are. You know, in the coffee case, for example, from the fields all the way through from the exporter, the importer, the roaster, the distributors, the marketers, the consumer, all these different steps and who they are, how each one of them is organized. And even back into, well, how much does each one make out of the dollar that's spent on the coffee? And is it a just amount in relation to the distribution across the chain? And just thinking about different ways of understanding how all parts of the food system are important. And some of the projects that I've been involved with more recently, there's one called Food Commons. Check it out, foodcommons.org. It tries to bring together, you know, the production piece, the processing piece, the distribution piece, the consumption piece, all at the community level. Pilot studies starting in the city of Fresno, Central Valley of California, a county that's probably, as a county, got its value of its production agriculture is higher than most countries in the world. And some of the indices of poverty, of malnutrition, of lack of access to food in the city of Fresno are the worst in the country. What is that? And at the same time, in the downtown parts of Fresno, there's abandoned land. There are abandoned buildings, abandoned stores that are owned by the city of Fresno. They had to take them over. The idea is to create a system where that land is in a trust. Those buildings are in a trust owned by the city. Access is given to producers, and the integration of producers that aren't just in the city but around the city as well, all part of a network. And a food hub in the middle that aggregates it all, and brings it together and then moves it back out into the consumption end. And in the middle are the processing and all that. It's supported by the trust. And at the heart of the trust is what's it called? It's a bank, a community bank that's a trust, with a board of directors that are members of the community. They're not CEOs getting their big salaries. They're there to help the community, but they're knowledgeable in economics and banking and financing and all that kind of stuff. And they have a fund that's created by the community itself that brings people in, gives them an opportunity. Because one of the biggest problems with small farmers getting into farming is, how do you pay for the land? How do you get the equipment? And here's an opportunity for doing that. And adding into it an educational piece as well. So these are projects that are starting to happen in different places that I think integrate agroecology all through the food system.
We only have 5 more minutes, so do you want to ask a question?
Well, yeah, I was the person that asked that question, and I guess one thing that I'm trying to get at, I asked Ines about this in class, and he said he doesn't think a lot of agroecologists are talking about it, which is not as much how to apply the social aspects, the social value of agroecology to the food chain. That makes sense to me, but applying ecological principles to something that is inherently not really ecological, such as how do we process sustainably, how do we move food around sustainably, and I mean energy efficiency, not just the social aspect. And I just think in the United States, if we spend a lot of time thinking about the production end and put all these agroecological principles into production, it's almost wasted on us in a country where we put so much energy into even home production is about 25% of the energy used in the U.S. food system. So that's something that I really struggle with, and I'd be curious to see sort of an exercise of agroecologists applying maybe ideas about scale or what would it even look like in different parts of this country to maybe change production so that it's closer to the consumer, closer to the farmer. What's the best way to eat this amazing product that we're talking about coming out of the field?
Well, obviously, it's so important to look at this as a whole system. And I think that's the basic ecological principle concept that we're pushing forward. That it's all connected, it's all related. You can't do something in one part of the system without being aware about the impacts and relationships with other parts of the system. And ecology gives us a foundation for understanding that, being it energetics, being it nutrient cycling, be it population balances between the organisms that make up the system, all that, or what it is that makes the system stable over time. These are all concepts that we are applying at all levels, and you have to have them all functioning. So I think it's there. It's up to us to begin to use it. And that's one of the reasons why I'm the editor of a journal called the Journal of Sustainable Agriculture. And as of January 1st, the publishers of that journal have agreed to a name change, which isn't easy to do in the journal business. But they accepted it. It's going to be Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems. It's going to be a forum for the very things you're talking about. And some of the kinds of papers that will be published will be energetic studies, will be nutrient studies, will be community-based change studies, but where agroecology and food system change come together. And it's going to be a major change. The first time we've had an international journal with the word agroecology in English in the title. That's a change. And the editors, the publishers supporting that and seeing a change coming just because of the demand for their product, which are publications with the word agroecology. And the first issue of that journal, which will come out in January, is the special issue that Ernesto, Chris, and Rose were the guest editors on. It's really exciting.
this concludes, and I'm going to pass it to Ernesto to conclude the panel.
Yes, I just want to conclude by thanking everyone who worked pretty hard to do this. Again, Steve and Robbie, thank you for giving us some vacation time to share with UVM folks. I wanted to thank Martha Caswell, who put a lot of work into getting this organized. Anne-Marie Resnick at BSS also helped set it up. Sebastian, Marcela, Merrill, Katie, Caitlin, who's back there with young Connor. The fourth generation. Thank you so much to everyone and everyone that came